This story was sent by a viewer, and it happened some time ago. When Sarah moved into the old, decrepit house on the edge of town, she didn't think much of its history. It was cheap, isolated, and perfect for someone who needed peace and quiet. The creaky floorboards, the peeling wallpaper, and the dusty furniture only added to the charm in her eyes. It felt like an escape, a fresh start after a painful breakup. But something was off. It started with the noises. At night, Sarah would hear soft scratching sounds coming from the walls. At first, she assumed it was a house settling. But the sounds grew louder, more insistent, almost like something was trying to get out. She would sit up in bed, heart racing, straining to hear over the thumping of her pulse. The scratching would stop just as quickly as it started, but it was enough to send shivers down her spine. One evening, as she was unpacking boxes in the living room, she heard a low, raspy whisper coming from the wall behind her. "Help me?" She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The house was empty when she moved in. She was sure of it. The whisper wasn't her imagination. There was something inside the walls. Something or someone. Terrified, Sarah decided to investigate. She grabbed a flashlight, her hands trembling as she approached the wall where she had heard the voice. Her heart raced in her chest as she pressed her ear against the cold surface. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the whisper came again, louder this time. "Get out!" The flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the wall. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she couldn't pull herself away. She had to know. Slowly, she pried at the old plaster with a butter knife, hoping to find an explanation. Her heart pounded as she dug deeper into the wall. Then she felt it, something soft but firm beneath the surface. It was warm. She yanked harder, and a piece of the wall came away with a loud crack. What she saw made her blood run cold. Behind the wall, there was a small, dust-covered space. And inside the space, a child doll sat in the middle of the darkness, its eyes wide open, staring directly at her. The doll had an unnerving smile, as if it were waiting for her. She gasped, stepping back. But that wasn't all. She noticed something else. Behind the doll, a message had been scrawled on the wall in thick, smeared red paint. It read, "They're watching you." After that night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The whispers and scratching sounds only grew louder, filling the entire house with an ominous presence. She couldn't ignore it anymore. She tried to brush it off as a house settling, but her mind refused to cooperate. The following day, she met the neighbor, Mrs. Owens, an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. Sarah wanted to ask about the house's history, but she hesitated. She didn't want to sound crazy. But Mrs. Owens seemed to know exactly what Sarah was thinking. "You've heard them, haven't you?" she asked in a low voice. "H heard what?" Sarah stammered, her heart racing. "The whispers," Mrs. Owens replied. "The house has never been right. Not since the last owners disappeared. Some say they went mad. Others say they just vanished." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Disappeared?" Mrs. Owens nodded gravely. "People say the house has a way of keeping things. It doesn't let go. It takes." As Mrs. Owens spoke, Sarah could feel a chill creep down her spine. She had no more. But as Mrs. Owens turned to leave, she stopped, her gaze narrowing as she looked at Sarah with sudden intensity. "Don't go into the basement," Mrs. Owens warned. "Whatever you do, don't go down there." That night, the whispers grew louder, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was in the house with her. She couldn't take it any longer. The next morning, she decided to investigate the basement. She had to know what was really going on. With a deep breath, Sarah descended into the dark, musty basement, the air thick with the scent of mildew and decay. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the hollow space. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she shined her flashlight around. Her heart stopped. In the center of the room, the walls were covered in strange, unsettling symbols, marks that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. And in the far corner, a large, iron door stood ajar. The air around it was cold, unnaturally cold, as though someone was trying to escape. Sarah hesitated, but the compulsion to discover the truth was too strong. She stepped forward, her flashlight trembling in her hand as she approached the iron door. Her breath came in short gasps, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. As she pushed the door open, a wave of cold air hit her face. The space beyond was a small, dimly lit room, its walls lined with more symbols, like the ones in the basement. But in the center of the room, there was something far worse than she could have imagined. There, in the middle of the room, was a small wooden crate. The crate was old, covered in dirt and cobwebs. It looked ancient. Trembling, Sarah reached out to open it. She felt as if she were being drawn in by some unseen force, her fingers grazing the wood before pulling the lid open. Inside the crate there was nothing, just empty space. But then she heard it, the scratching and the whispering. Her heart raced as she turned to leave, but before she could move, the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. Panic gripped her as she desperately tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, surrounding her. The walls seemed to close in, as if the house was alive, feeding off her fear. Suddenly, she felt something cold touch her back. She spun around, her flashlight falling to the ground. There, standing in front of her, was the doll. Its wide eyes stared at her, its smile even more unsettling in the dim light. Then she saw it. The doll's mouth began to move. Slowly it whispered, "You're mine now." And with that, everything went black. To this day, Sarah's whereabouts remain unknown. The house was abandoned again, the new owners moving in only to leave just as quickly. The walls still whisper, and the doll waits, its smile never fading. Some say Sarah's soul is trapped in the house, waiting for the next tenant. And as for the doll, well, it's still there, watching, waiting for someone to listen. This story was sent by a viewer, and it happened some time ago. It was a quiet Sunday evening when Alex and his friends decided to rent a cabin in the woods for the weekend. They wanted to escape the constant noise of the city and enjoy a few days in peace. The cabin was old, a bit run down, but charming in its own way. The kind of place you'd expect to find in an old horror movie. The first night was relaxing. They lit a fire, played some games, and shared stories under the dim glow of the fireplace. But as midnight approached, the air grew colder, and the forest outside seemed to grow still. The wind that had been whistling through the trees suddenly stopped, leaving an unsettling silence. Alex was the first to notice it. "Did anyone else hear that?" he asked, his voice sharp with unease. His friends, a bit tipsy from drinks, shrugged it off. "It's probably just the wind," one of them said. But Alex couldn't shake the feeling. There was something off about the cabin, something hidden beneath the creaky floorboards, something that didn't belong. Later that night, when everyone else had gone to sleep, Alex lay awake in his bed, staring up at the ceiling. He couldn't explain it, but he felt like there was a presence in the room, someone watching him. The darkness seemed to stretch and crawl, like something was lurking just out of sight. The whispers started then, low, almost inaudible at first, but growing louder by the second. It sounded like a woman's voice, faintly crying, whispering something over and over. Alex bolted upright, his heart hammering in his chest. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and crept to the door, trying not to wake the others. He opened the door just enough to slip through and made his way down the narrow hallway. The voice was louder now, clearly coming from the living room. Hesitant, he tiptoed closer, holding his breath. As he peered around the corner into the dark living room, he froze. There was a figure sitting by the fireplace. A woman, hunched over, her back to him. Her hair was long and matted, covering most of her face, and her clothes were ragged, as if she'd been trapped in the cabin for years. The whispering stopped. Alex stepped back, his pulse quickening. He wanted to run, but his body wouldn't respond. Slowly, the woman turned her head to look at him, and for a split second their eyes met. Her gaze was hollow, empty, devoid of life. Then she spoke in a hoarse, breathless voice. "You shouldn't have come." The next morning, Alex tried to convince himself that he had imagined it. Maybe the combination of the drinks and exhaustion had played tricks on his mind. But when he told his friends about the woman, they all dismissed it as a figment of his imagination, nothing more than a nightmare. Despite their reassurances, The feeling of unease lingered, and Alex couldn't shake the sight of the woman's hollow eyes. He decided to explore the cabin and the surrounding woods during the day to keep his mind off things. He went into the attic to search for anything that might explain the strange feeling in the cabin. As he poked through dusty boxes and old furniture, his eyes landed on something peculiar, a photo yellowed with age. It showed a woman standing in front of the very cabin, a smile on her face, surrounded by a group of people. But in the background, a shadow seemed to loom, stretching unnaturally over the house. The woman in the photo had the same hollow eyes. The photo sent a chill down his spine. Who was she? Why did she look so familiar? Curiosity gnawed at him, and he began to search through more boxes, hoping to find more answers. That's when he came across a small, leather-bound journal. It was old, the pages worn and brittle, but the ink was still legible. He opened it to the first page. They came here for peace, but they were never meant to leave. Alex's breath caught in his throat. The journal spoke of strange occurrences in the cabin, disappearances, whispers in the walls, and something far more sinister. The last entry was dated just days before the photo was taken. I see her now. She waits by the fire, whispering her name. She will not stop until we are all gone. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps. Alex's heart pounded as he quickly stuffed the journal back into its hiding place and rushed down to the living room. His friends were standing there, wide-eyed, staring at the broken window. The curtains were flapping wildly in the wind, but there was no sign of anyone outside. "I swear I heard something," one of his friends said, his voice shaky. It was like footsteps, but they weren't ours. Alex's stomach dropped. He knew something was wrong. The woman from last night wasn't just a hallucination. She was real, and she wasn't going to let them leave. That night, the terror escalated. Alex couldn't sleep. The air in the cabin felt suffocating, and the shadows seemed to stretch and shift. He could hear footsteps pacing outside his room, growing louder as if someone or something was getting closer. His heart raced as he bolted out of bed and opened the door to the hallway. His friends were gone. The whispers filled the space, louder now, growing frantic. "Get out! Get out! She's coming for you." Alex ran to the dark hall, searching for his friends, but the cabin seemed to be endless, stretching in every direction. It was as if the walls were closing in on him, pulling him deeper into the dark, twisting labyrinth of the house. He finally reached the front door, desperate to escape, but when he tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. The wood was warped, the lock jammed. Panicked, he looked around, searching for another way out. Then he saw her. The woman was standing in the doorway, her face obscured by the long, matted hair. Her hollow eyes burned into him. She took a slow step forward, and the temperature in the room dropped drastically. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice a rasping echo. "Now you'll join them." Alex felt a cold hand wrap around his wrist, pulling him back. The shadows around him seemed to come alive, curling and reaching toward him. His legs buckled beneath him, and he fell to his knees. Suddenly, everything went dark. The next morning, the cabin was silent. Alex's friends never found him. The police found no signs of a struggle, no evidence of anything unusual. The cabin was empty, save for a broken window, and a single photo lying on the floor, a photo of Alex standing alone by the fireplace, his eyes hollow and vacant. And in the reflection of the glass, a shadow could be seen, one that wasn't there before. Ending. No one ever went back to that cabin in the woods. It stood abandoned, but some say that if you pass by on a quiet night, you can hear whispers carried by the wind, whispers warning you to never enter, to never seek out the forgotten guest. And if you're unlucky enough to step inside, the last thing you'll hear is her voice, soft and chilling, saying, "Welcome home." This story was sent by a viewer, and it happened some time ago. Ever since Jason moved into the old apartment complex on the outskirts of town, things had felt strange. The building was old, probably built in the 1920s, but it was cheap, and that's what mattered. He was on a tight budget, and the price was right. The creaky floorboards and the dim hallways didn't bother him too much. In fact, it felt kind of nostalgic, like living in a place out of an old black and white film. But then there was the mirror. Jason had always been cautious around mirrors. He never liked looking at his own reflection for too long. It made him uneasy, though he couldn't explain why. When he moved into the apartment, there was a large, ornate mirror hanging above the bathroom sink, its silver frame beautifully decorated with intricate patterns. But when he looked into it, something felt wrong. The reflection seemed off. It wasn't the way he looked, but more the way everything around him seemed to shift. The light would bend strangely. The shadows would stretch and twist in odd directions, and sometimes his reflection would linger for a second after he'd moved, almost as though it had a life of its own. At first, he chalked it up to fatigue. Maybe he was imagining things, the late nights, the new place, the pressure of his new job. But the longer he stayed, the more intense the feeling became. One evening, after another long day at work, Jason returned to his apartment and decided to take a quick shower to clear his mind. As the water poured over him, he felt something behind him, cold, almost like a breath on his neck. He turned quickly, expecting to see the bathroom door open, but it was shut tight. No one was there. He stared at his reflection in the fogged-up mirror, and for a moment, he swore he saw someone standing just behind him, their face obscured in the mist. He spun around, his heart pounding. The bathroom was empty. The air was thick and heavy, but there was no one else. "Get a grip," he muttered to himself, trying to shake the feeling off. But when he wiped the steam from the mirror, the reflection wasn't just his. There was someone else, just barely visible in the corner of the glass, their face turned away. He couldn't explain it. But in that moment, Jason knew one thing for sure. Something was terribly wrong. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and confusion. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It wasn't just a mirror anymore. He felt it everywhere, like eyes were always on him, following his every move. He spent his nights researching the history of the building, hoping to find some explanation. He learned that the apartment complex had a dark past. Decades ago, there had been strange disappearances. A few residents had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only their belongings. No one knew why or how. The building's former tenants had never spoken of it, and the few records that remained were incomplete. But there were whispers of something sinister lurking within the walls. One night, Jason was woken by a noise, a scraping sound coming from the bathroom. His pulse quickened. He had grown used to the strange sounds the old building made. But this was different. This wasn't just the house settling. It was something else. Reluctantly, he got out of bed and crept down the hallway to the bathroom. The light flickered overhead as he stepped inside, and his gaze fell upon the mirror. It was fogged up again, the condensation gathering in strange patterns, but Jason could see something in the reflection. It wasn't him. It was a figure standing behind him, their face obscured by shadows. The figure reached out, slowly, towards him, as if trying to touch his shoulder. Jason's heart raced. His breath came out in shallow gasps as he slowly turned around. The bathroom was empty. There was no one there. But as he turned back to the mirror, the figure in the reflection hadn't moved. It was still there, frozen, just staring at him. That night, Jason could hardly sleep. The whispering, the shadows, and the cold breath had become too much. He couldn't stay in the apartment anymore. He knew he had to leave, but a part of him still felt trapped, like something was pulling him back to the mirror, something that didn't want him to escape. As dawn broke, Jason gathered his things. But as he packed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn back to the bathroom. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, almost as if something else was guiding them. When he entered the bathroom, the mirror seemed to call to him, pulling him closer. He had to see it again. He had to know what was behind it. With shaking hands, Jason grabbed the edge of the mirror frame. It was cold to the touch, colder than he remembered. As he lifted it from the wall, a piece of paper fluttered out from behind it, falling to the floor. Jason froze, staring at the paper. It was old, yellowed, and crumpled as though it had been hidden there for years. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a hastily scrawled note. "The mirror is a doorway. It doesn't reflect who you are. It reflects who you could have been. And if you stare long enough, it will take you. A chill ran down his spine. He looked up at the mirror, and for the first time, he saw the truth. The reflection was no longer just a reflection. It was him, but not him. The version of himself in the mirror was smiling, but it was a twisted, grotesque smile that made his stomach churn. The figure in the glass reached out once more, and this time, Jason couldn't pull away. His body moved on its own accord, as if his reflection had taken control. It reached out, and Jason felt cold hands wrap around his wrist. The last thing Jason saw before everything went black was his own face, smiling back at him. A week later, the apartment complex was eerily quiet. The door to Jason's apartment was locked, and his things were still scattered inside. His neighbors hadn't seen him leave. And the mirror? It was gone. There was no sign of it anywhere in the apartment. Just an empty, bare wall. But at night, if you walk past Jason's old building, you might see a faint glow through the window. If you're brave enough to peer inside, you'll see it. Jason's reflection, staring back at you, grinning from the other side.